So welcome to our tutorial on cutting SVG files that support our embroidery designs. So there are a few creators out there on the market at the moment that when you purchase an embroidery in the hoop applique design, you actually receive the SVG file that comes with it so you can cut it on your cutter. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So we have gone ahead and we have opened our Creative Drawing Simple Cut software. So even though it's an SVG file, the actual project that we're creating is a new project. So it's, it's not like when you have an embroidery design and you open it, and because it's an existing design, we're loading a new design into our software. So we always go create new when we bring anything in. We go next. Because we're just cutting our fabric today with our cutter, we only need to have our cut technique selected. So we go next. Now we're going to locate our artwork on our computer. So this is the SVG files that you received in your email. So it will depend on wherever you saved them when you downloaded them to your computer. So we're going to click on our icon. So for example, I saved mine directly to my desktop, and we're looking for G110720M is the first one. And you can see here down in our preview, you can see our little SVG file that we're going to cut out, and that's the applique for our little lizard's body. So we go open. For today's project, I'm using my 12-inch cutter. So I have my 12-inch by 12-inch mat selected. We go finish. So you can see now in front of us that we've got our SVG file in on our mat. So the next step is we need to tell our software what we're actually planning on cutting our SVG file from. So what material we're going to use. So we're using fabric backed with fusible webbing, so we get a nice strong bond for our in the hoop embroidery. So what we need to do is we need to come over to our object properties, and we're going to click down on our cutter preset menu, and you can see here it says fabric backed with fusible webbing. So we're just going to click on that one because that is the one that we're using today. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to change our cutter speed to 35. So we're going to slow it down a bit. I do find that if I slow it down, it gives it a better cut, and it just helps with the fabric, just nicely glides through the fabric. I find sometimes if it goes too quick, then you get situations where if your fabric isn't attached to your mat correctly, it will pull away from your mat. So at least at a slower speed, if anything like that does end up happening, you do have time to pause your machine. The other thing you need to take in note, so it's got here cutter pressure. We're not changing that. It's got our blade passes, so it's only going to do one pass on the mat. You've got your blade depth, which is set on 4, and our blade color is yellow. So if we wanted to, we could send that through to our cutter now. But what that means is that you'd have to line up your little laser point here, cut one out, move over, line up your next one, cut it out, and so on and so on. So what we're going to do is to minimize wastage on our mat, we're going to copy and paste a couple of these. So we're going to move just by dragging with our mouse our SVG file up into the left corner. We're then going to select copy and paste and move our second one over. So you can see in our sequence tray, we now have 2. and we're going to paste another one. So we have 3. So we now have 3 in our larger size. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to bring in our smaller SVG files, but we just can't bring them straight in and add them onto our mat because they're an SVG file, they're not a draw file. If you have them saved as a draw file, you'd be able to bring them in directly, but you can't because they're an SVG. So to do that, we need to open a new page. So we come up to here to new, and we're going to select new. Same cutting, so we don't need to make any changes with our technique. We're still doing the same technique. We just need to locate that second design. So you can see here in the preview, and you can see here that he's smaller in size because you've got your measurements over here on the right hand side. So okay, we don't need to worry about our mat, and we've brought him in. So you can see now he's in on his own little page. If I come over here to the left hand side of the screen, you can see I now have 2 pages open. So before we copy him, what we need to do is we need to tell the computer what we plan to cut on. So once again, we select our fabric with fusible webbing, change our speed. Okay, so now that we've got those set, we can press copy. And then we're going to open up that first page that we had. And we're going to press paste on this page. And then that pastes the SVG file from the other page into this page. So just move him around a bit. So we're going to copy, so we've got 3 of those as well. So while we still have him selected with his box, we go copy and paste, move it along, and then we're going to paste our third one. Bring him up. So you should then have, in your sequence tray, you should have 6 cut files. So you can see here he's a little bit of a distance between those 2. That's pretty good. If you really wanted to, you could bring him down a little bit and move him around so he's a little bit more centered between the 2. So it's up to you how many lizards you would like to cut out. You could keep going until you can fit as many on as possible. But just for purpose of this video, we're just going to stay with 6. We can now send that through to our cutter. So we go File, Export to Cutters, and Connect. So now we can load our cutter into our machine. So as you can see here, I have our fabric backed with fusible webbing attached to our green mat. And the reason behind this is the applique webbing that I'm using is actually backed with a paperback. So sometimes you can get a paperback one, and sometimes you can get one that's a bit more glossy. So it depends on what applique paper I'm using as to what mat I use. So you can see that I've flattened it down and taped it down with my washi tape. I've loaded it in, and now that I'm using the arrows on my computer to line up the laser point and trace out our pattern, just to check so that it's going to all fit on our fabric. Once we know that it's all fits on our fabric, we can press cut on our computer, and the machine will go ahead and cut out our pattern pieces. So as you can see here, even though I've slowed the cutter down, it is still quite quick process. Okay, so my cutter has now finished cutting, and I'm just using a fine set of tweezers just to bring up those patterns. So I'm just scrolling around. So the day that I chose to cut these, we actually had a bit of rain in the air, so there was quite a bit of moisture. And you'll find, just once I take this second one up, you'll see that there was a little bit of paper left. There we go, just a little bit of paper left. And that's because the actual moisture in the air gets into your paper. Sorry. So you will find that certain things actually affect it. So once we've cut all those out, we're going to hoop up our first placement. So depending on where you would like to put your lizard on your background fabric, you can line it up. So I've used a medium weight fusible tearaway stabilizer. I just find that it gives me a nice even hooping, so I don't have any bubbles in the hoop when I hoop it, and it keeps it nice and flat. So we're going to attach that to our embroidery machine now. So I've gone ahead and I've loaded in my embroidery design, and we're going to stitch out our first color change. So the first color change is actually going to be the embroidery part, and it's the legs of the lizards. So one little leg, move over and do the second. So the placement on the actual backing fabric is up to you. You can just place them randomly if you like. You can place them down the center. Um, Today's tutorial is more about the actual technique of bringing in that SVG file into your software. So when we come up to our next color change, we don't actually change the color of our thread. We're just going to keep it black. The reason that there's the color change on the actual design is more just to allow the machine to stop so you can place that fabric down. So next we're going to stitch out our placement stitch. And this is going to show us where we're going to lay our fabric down. So once that's finished, we then remove our hoop from our machine. We've laid it on a flat surface. We've taken our backing fabric off our applique piece. And now we're just going to use a travel line and press down on the fabric to activate that glue and stick our fabric into place. We can now return that to our embroidery machine. And we're going to stitch out our final color change. So as you can see, as it embroiders along, that it's actually creating a textured embroidery stitch over the top of our applique piece of fabric. So it just gives it a little bit of a different effect to our applique. As you can see, my machine just stopped there. What it's actually doing is on the Memory Craft 15,000 is it actually stops and checks how much bobbin you've got left. So that's why it stopped. So we're now working our way down to the end of the tail. And then once it finishes all our texture stitch, it's going to come back around the edge of the applique fabric. So it's going to move back up. And now it's creating a zigzag over those raw edges of our applique. And it's going to go all the way around the body. So that's going to tack all those raw edges down for us. Even though we've got our applique on the back, it's just going to help infuse it all. And now it's going to create a satin stitch. So with the satin stitch, it's actually doing the underlay for the satin stitch to start with. And then it will come back and complete the satin stitch around the edge of our design. So then it's up to you how many you'd like to put on your table runner. You can keep going and keep going. It's up to you if you want to do them different colors. If you wanted to do them different colors, it's just a matter of matching up your embroidery thread with your so once we've finished, we remove it, and then we remove our applique fab our tearaway stabilizer from the back. Make sure we've got it all. And there's our little lizard, all finished.